Representative Epps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair at this moment. Ms. Catherine, if you're doing the video, I would love it if you would stay zoomed out because I'm about to cry, and nobody needs to see that. I rise in support of this bill and a little discombobulated because of the actions of my party, but is now the time where I can move?
You may move amendments if you have them.
Let's start with move L001 and ask that it be displayed.
1 second, we'll get that displayed. And 1 second, Representative Epps, I think we just need a few more copies.
That was 8.
Oh, the House will stand in a brief recess.
did.
The committee will come back to order.
Could have been done 10 minutes.
Representative Epps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L012 and ask that it be displayed. I'm just thinking, what if 12 amended? I withdraw the motion to move L011.
The amendment is withdrawn.
I move L012 and ask that it be displayed.
1 second, we'll have that properly displayed.
And I renew my request for Ms. Catherine to please pull the cameras way out.
The amendment is properly before us. Please proceed.
So, there are a few things that we do in this body that are more important than taking care of the most vulnerable amongst us. And I am a person who has spent many years receiving what we would have called food stamp benefits. I still have them. They look like Monopoly money. Raised my child with SNAP benefits. Name changed around 2008. It was critical for us to get by year-round and in the summer. This amendment brings together that earlier you heard a bill sponsor say, let me just look, I want to say it exactly right. They said, for what better purpose than to feed hungry, vulnerable children? And you heard another speaker say that we were a nation that was fortunate to have so much. Another colleague said that it wasn't the role of government to take on this care. This amendment clarifies that not only is it the role of government to take care of our most vulnerable, but is to do so without exploiting other impoverished children. Before I was born, our predecessors ran brave resolutions and bills fighting to keep Colorado's portion of federal dollars and Colorado's dollars from contributing to the oppression of anybody else's children. And as a parent of a child who depended on SNAP, as someone who did myself, it is deeply offensive that when we can make a decision, we all like to say how budgets are moral documents, how we spend our money is moral, that when we can make a decision that much of the world has made to not further fund and underwrite the ethnic cleansing that is happening on our watch. A Trail of Tears is being live streamed. Those children are hungry. It is being live streamed. We cannot, at the state level, change all federal policy, although some of you will be federal officials one day. We cannot handle all international relations issues. But what we can do is be clear that when we're feeding Colorado's most vulnerable children, summer or otherwise, that we're not doing so in a way that further exacerbates the demonstrable objective harm being done to children in the occupied territories. This amendment clarifies. You all know that we don't say in legislation business names specifically or products specifically. So it uses the language of the UN, and there's two amendments because the EBT, the summer EBT, touches two different parts of our code related to Department of State, Department of Education. It's identical text. And it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, food products that originate in occupied territories are not eligible for purchase with an electronic benefits card issued through the Summer Electronic Benefits Transfer for Children program. In case it was unclear, as used in this section, unless the context otherwise requires, food products that originate in occupied territories, not this occupied territory, but the UN recognized occupied territories, means any food for domestic home consumption as defined in 7 U.S.C. section 2012K as amended for purposes of the federal food stamp program or any successor program. In case anyone was unclear, occupied territories means the West Bank, it means East Jerusalem, and it means the Gaza Strip. We've heard talk about our most vulnerable children, the ones we love, and them being ready to go back to class in the fall. Right now, in the occupied territories, which is funny to somebody over here, but right now in the occupied territories, we're losing 10 classrooms of children per day. 10 classrooms, 9 to 10 classrooms of, if they were appropriately sized and not beyond capacity. 170 children a day I brought this amendment in part because I recognize fully none of us can know about everything. And some of y'all are wild smart, but none of us can know about everything. None of us can be an expert on everything. You cannot be an expert on the Uyghurs and what's happening in the Congo and Sudan, or maybe you can, but probably not all at once. But I come from a woman who would have moved an amendment like this because when I was 8 years old, she was taking me to DC to protest along her Jewish best friend as we marched for Palestinian liberation. So I don't have the privilege of playing these political games and not running an amendment to clarify. We already limit how we can spend food stamps. You cannot use food stamps, I'm old. You cannot use your SNAP benefits to buy hot food. So God forbid you don't have a refrigerator or a stove, you can't buy prepared food. Summer months, kids can't buy, with Colorado EBT, can't buy foods that can be prepared, that can be consumed in the store. You can't buy many other things, but we already have limitations. And this body has a history a precedent for amendments like these, which fall so squarely within the title, of us deciding which side of history we're going to be on. We're going to come back in January and do some memorials that we do every single year, and we should. We should do those resolutions and memorials, but in 8 to 10 years, we're going to be doing them because there are no Palestinians left alive in the territory. They're all going to be in the diaspora on our watch. This amendment is part of my answer, and it's simple. I can't name the products, but we're talking about 2 products left that would be limited. But it puts us on the right side of history. It's not about telling poor people how to spend their money. It's about directing how we prioritize our money. It's about looking at the amendments like this that were in 78 and 82, and shout out to the research staff who found all these old resolutions on microfiche. This amendment is mild and just saying, it doesn't even name a specific country. It uses the language that the United Nations uses. Some years ago, on a date very close to today, the anniversary was earlier this month, Shirley Chisholm won an election. And she spoke of how necessarily uncomfortable the people with power were gonna be with her being there. She spoke about not welcoming it, but expecting it, because things are working just fine for them. I'm fine. I'm gonna be okay. In this job, not in this job. But while I don't believe in a heaven, my dead mother can't know that the little girl she took to march for Palestine in a state where our entire federal delegation is willingly...
Epps, I want to keep us focused on the amendment.
The amendment, that is a fair request, and I try to remember to say it, the amendment every few seconds, because this amendment is saying that where we put our resources, where we permit our share of resources to go, is more important than certain people's feelings. We are on the wrong side of history if we are not willing to say, because it doesn't, any occupied territory, that anywhere in the world, that how dare we, in the service of feeding our poorest children, exploit those 170 a day. This amendment, which is parallel to the one for the Department of Education, is being clear. This body has passed similar full bills into statutes related to the Sudan, related to Iran. This is a thing we know how to consider. This isn't what I wanted to run, but naively, I trusted that my colleagues, who I gave advance notice, would not line up against me to run out the clock.
Representative Epps, I'm going to redirect you back to the amendment.
And I'm going to say what I was saying.
And Representative Epps, I'll need you to stick to the amendment and not speak to people's motives.
I am sticking to the amendment. You are not going to do this right now. You are complicit in
The House will
that.
stand in a brief... The House will come back to order. Representative Epps.
I'm going to be real careful to not speak to motives, although I didn't. I don't know what the motive would be for wanting to feed one set of children while exploiting others. I don't know what the motive would be, and it's embedded in this amendment, to do anything other than to allocate our resources in a way that is just. As I said, we can't name products, but we're talking about a relatively small limitation. This amendment doesn't require us to add special labeling as the EU has done. It requires us to consider that our calls for decorum, it's just a wild thing to care about when we're willingly looking the other way. And this amendment gives us the opportunity to stop doing that. It is 2 amendments because there's 2 authorizing statutes that are relevant. But when the governor called for this extraordinary session that leads to this amendment, directing legislators to put people over politics, which relates to this amendment, when he called on Coloradans to look towards those in immediate need of immediate relief and aid, to aid our most vulnerable. The parameters of the governor's call were appropriately narrowly tailored, as is this amendment, to direct us as a General Assembly to focus on 5 subjects of immediate concern. And all 5 of the mandates, just like this amendment, are directed at supporting those in greatest need. There's a recognition in the governor's call that we owe a special duty of care to children. Healthy kids both in and out of school. Some of you will have known what it's like to need food stamps, SNAP, to assist your families. Others can imagine it. But this amendment assures that those of us who do rely and have relied do not have to be complicit at every turn. In looking the other way, while as this amendment points to the occupied territories, while ethnic cleansing is underway. This amendment is connected to the fact that Colorado children in accessing foods during next summer, when the program will start, in a state where so many of us are prospering, over 300,000 of our children remain food insecure. This is a policy choice. This amendment speaks to our, I started to say our collective desire, and I've got to be real clear, I couldn't get the chair's clarification on what exactly he means by motive. I'm not speaking to motive, I'm speaking to the amendment. But most of us in this room, we want kids to eat. We probably all want kids to eat. For some of us, that doesn't stop at Colorado borders. And it's a testament to our values that while we protect Colorado kids from food insecurity and hunger, while we do the work that we know, just like investing in early childhood that gives our little ones a better chance to be rested and participate in the school year, we can't do that while underwriting the active annihilation and starvation of other folks' children. This amendment, like its sibling, pair, one to follow, recognizes that Colorado, we're one of only a few states to offer free, somebody pays, but school breakfast and lunch to all students. We understand, at least our policy choices have reflected a commitment to trying to understand that we don't discern between class and race and ethnicity if deciding if a child should eat. And we don't want or need our resources being used this way. It's not about the motive, it's about the amendment, Mr. Chair, but the idea that it was so hard to be allowed to even speak about this. I'm going to ask for a yes vote, but I fully expect it to fail 64-1. And that's okay. Because when we revisit this amendment, when we add to our list of future resolutions that will build on this amendment, there'll be a record that someone tried. Just like in 78 and 80 and 82 and 84, our predecessors ran brave legislation that lost, but that was clearly on the right side of history. This amendment speaks to the health of our children and others. Some people know, some don't, but I have an invisible disability that's not going to be invisible for much longer. And this amendment, this amendment speaks to, in a state where we have so much, where we are not cash poor, where we have the resources to feed our children. The amendment isn't even directing that we do anything affirmative to help. Not even asking that we help, but just that we decide that our favorite hummus and dates are going to be purchased from a different company than one that is exploiting starving children, where people are, as the amendment alludes to, losing children at a rate that is astronomical. And as this amendment reminds us, we know that some populations have less access. What I want you to understand when I talk about our predecessors, because when I think about this amendment, what the Honorable Representative Chisholm said in terms of expecting pushback. All of us, I think I can speak to motive if it's positive, but all of us are experts in something or some things. And whatever you're an expert in, you don't have the privilege to hold that back from this body, from your constituents. If you're a county commissioner and know about how to handle local government, you owe it to us to share that, right? If you're a teacher, you owe us that expertise. And if your mother has been dragging you to workers, well, a whole lot of protests with strikes, but that definitely is beyond the amendment. But if your mother was dragging you to Palestinian liberation marches alongside your dozens in Northern Virginia we didn't have many Palestinian friends, but plenty of Jewish ones and plenty of Christians and plenty of good heathens like me, dragging us to DC to support, you don't get to be silent on it. And this amendment reminds that if all we can do in Colorado is have a failed amendment on the record, like the failed amendments when our predecessors didn't quite get it right the first time in 78. If all we can do is this amendment that just says, fully consistent with federal guidelines, we already in Colorado limit how poor folks can spend their money. Our discomfort is nothing compared to the discomfort of our hungry kids. I feel like an old lady saying kiddos, but this amendment pulls from, this is not my language. It's the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This amendment pulls from that assertion that children are entitled, as the bill sponsor said, meaning Colorado children, but pulls from the idea that children are entitled to special protections. The amendment recognizes the importance of our international cooperation because our liberation is independent. Those are separate words, dependent on each other. This amendment was crafted the week that November 12th of this year, the Director General of the United Nations announced that the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations considers, in respect to this amendment, all the civilian population in Gaza to be food insecure. 100% of the population, all of the people. What does it mean to have 100% of the people food insecure? This amendment points to the fact that this extraordinary, our colleague reminded us, extra and ordinary earlier today, that this amendment points to that this extraordinary crisis facing Palestinian children across the occupied territory, which includes Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Just like our governor's call, this amendment requires us putting people over politics and necessitates that this 74th General Assembly take action now to provide immediate relief, but not at the expense of other vulnerable children. This was supposed to take a couple of minutes earlier, and I won't speak to motives, but I speak to this amendment because, as I said, I do not have the luxury of being silent about something that my mother took me to learn about as a child, that my friends nationwide are working together in support of. We care about feeding our kids, and we care about feeding all of ours and not creating a generation of who remains that is food insecure and that is hate-filled and vengeful. 100%. A week ago, every person is food insecure. A couple days later, actually 3 days ago, relating to this amendment, 3 days ago, the UN World Food Program, November 16th, the UN's World Food Program clarified that now they're doing their best guess at the half of the population being children because there's so many people missing under rubble. Food stocks are running out. Colorado families know about hunger too, as this amendment points to, and markets and bakeries have closed. They've been targeted and bombed. People are not allowed to collect rainwater. The most basic foundational elements of nutrition are being denied. And this amendment asks us to consider that Colorado not only has the precedents already mentioned, but we don't just have a precedent of a relationship with these issues, we have a precedent of a relationship with this issue. I don't know who was here when the relevant legislation was enacted, but this body has a precedent for this amendment because we have considered how as state employees, how our funds can be invested in the same way as this amendment. And the World Food Program spokesperson that same day on the 16th said, and this is someone who cares about Colorado children as well, because we're a part of the United Nations, that why this matters is that officials are now seeing cases of dehydration and malnutrition increasing so rapidly. It is now immediate starvation. Gazans are not able to have one meal per day. Children whose nutritional needs are high are not able to do that, and what they have consists of raw vegetables because there's no gas or fuel to cook, which is an awful lot like Colorado, where you can't buy prepared foods. Not the crisis the same as Colorado, but meaning the limitation in that availability. This same month that we're drafting and this amendment, the UN Secretary General said Gaza is now a graveyard for children. And all this amendment is asking is that I said 170. It's ranged from 160 to 171 of known children a day since my birthday. Those children aren't starving anymore, but the ones who have remained deserve a state that gives the state that cares to make better financial decisions when it comes to the limited impact we can have. There are people who would want you to think that this amendment, I'm not talking about the motives of anyone here, but would be controversial because they suggest that Jews and Gentiles, that Arabs and Palestinians and Israelis and Americans, that we are necessarily divided on the issue of children, and it's a lie. Of course there are policy differences, but you have to look no further than any of major train stations or consulate across the country to see that people are doing what they can, and this amendment gives us a chance to do what we can to be on the right side. It is an acceptable choice to vote no. But it is not acceptable to vote no on this amendment because you're concerned about interfering with federal eligibility, because it's carefully crafted to ensure that it's conditional. It only goes into effect as long as it's consistent and in alignment. It is okay to vote no for your policy reasons or personal reasons, but not because you're gonna use the excuse of, well, we don't wanna dictate what poor people can spend their money on. We're supposed to be on the side with this amendment of our predecessors in '78, who the version of this that I wanted to run just copied and pasted without attribution, just copied and pasted things we passed in the past that were much more direct in calling out, using words like evil and apartheid and intentionality. We're supposed to be on the side of that, and this amendment gives us a chance to recognize that when we lock Coloradans out of this house, their house, they're supposed to know that there's someone's, I'm giving up on grammar, in here who hear them. This amendment is an opportunity to recognize that while I don't know what factors, what confluence of cosmic, intentional, otherwise
Representative
factors.
Epps, please forgive my interruption. There are 15 minutes left in the hour, and I wanted to make sure we all were aware of that. Thank you.
How many minutes? What did you say?
14 minutes and
Thank
49 seconds.
I wonder how many Palestinian children are going to die in the next 14 minutes and 59 seconds. I know 100% of them are starving. Thank you for the time check. This amendment, I brought up Shirley Chisholm, and I get what the chairs are doing when they ask to stick to the amendment, but I also recognize how woefully culturally incompetent we are here. Because it is cultural.
Representative Epps, I'm going to ask you simply to speak to the amendment and not to the abilities of another person in the chamber. Love the proving of my point. But speaking in a narrative way, starting in the middle of a story to get to your point, is a shared cultural value for many of us. You know, in the occupied West Bank, which is mentioned explicitly in this amendment, including East Jerusalem, settler attacks have risen since my birthday from an average of 3 to 7 a day. According to the UN Office of the Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs, the Army, we have new flags representing countries we care about. The Army are burning, destroying food stocks, puncturing the tanks that have collected water and releasing them into the ground, burning what crops are existing, taking folks' olive trees. And this amendment gives us an opportunity to think about, when we're talking about nourishment of children, that if we don't do anything else, that the least we can do when we're not going to be on the right side is have a record that we were at least on the wrong side of history. And in considering this amendment that is about food insecurity, and we use all these warm, fuzzy terms about getting kids ready for school, it is an invitation to consider what makes us think that our children are uniquely deserving of wellness. This amendment harkens to the time when even before a lot of folks just learned about certain history in recent months, but many more of us know our history goes way further back. Food insecurity was already plaguing. There was already a UN list of corporations that were contributing to starvation and malnutrition in the occupied territories. Even before the bombardment that you can watch being live streamed, 60% in September of children were considered food insecure. And so this amendment gives us the opportunity to not be in the company of folks who are comfortable with it. We should have no appetite for apartheid. The food insecurity, what I'm about to say, look, I give people a lot of grace if they didn't know this, because there's a time in my life when I also didn't know what I'm about to say, but then I turned 6 years old. But the fact that it is the same folks who profit off of Colorado children remaining food insecure are aligned with those who profit off of poverty abroad. This amendment gives us a chance to extricate this state, as some cities and other municipalities have done, from being an active participant in this. The food insecurity, it's such a weird phrase because it sounds passive. It's food insecurity. Children are being starved. We have enough here. Communities are being abandoned. I've seen, I don't want to say bragging, but I've seen folks tout the increased number of EBT benefits that are getting to children. You have to be real careful when we celebrate that. And as glad as we are about summer EBT, the easiest yes, or one of the easiest yes votes I would cast this year, we have to be real careful when we celebrate a version of that without this amendment, because it's similar to I don't know if I'm allowed to mention that it's cultural to give an analogy, or if that's, but this amendment, the folks who support this work are often the same folks who support holiday turkey giveaways. And you have to be careful if you celebrate you're giving away more turkeys this year than last year. We're glad that people are getting fed, but that means you haven't curbed the insecurity. SNAP should be working itself out of business. Not a business. The goal isn't to have to subsidize more food, it's to have less children hungry. And we get further away from that goal when we decide Palestinian children aren't a part of the children we care about. It is a condition. It is a condition of the occupation. This is not my political analysis. This is the whole world's understanding. It is a condition of the occupation that a government exercises complete control over the type and amount of food that enters, or rather does not enter, Gaza. Colorado tax dollars are underwriting that, are underwriting the blockade. This amendment is directly connected to the last one I read was the 2021 Amnesty International report that detailed the specific restrictions on Palestinian food supplies that, while in magnitude and number and name and type are obviously different from the restrictions on Colorado families. They are similar in that there are folks with concentrated power who have more than enough, hoarding resources, the basic ones, food and water, at the expense of others. Too many Colorado children who will be helped by the passage of this bill as amended. They're not strangers to state violence, and neither are Palestinian children. I don't need everyone to understand what factors came together to make much of the world aware in this moment, but we are aware. And we can come together and work on property tax and quibble over who offered the best solutions. I mean, with all of our solutions, we're not doing enough to focus on the most marginalized, but we're trying, and that's progress. And this amendment gives us the opportunity to not do that without acknowledging that our decisions are interconnected. These things are not separate. I need my neighbors to understand that you are never going to get affordable housing or health care from folks who don't oppose ethnic cleansing. And this amendment that'll go down like, I don't want Representative Basenecker fussing at me, but the 1978, if I could have read it, they were so much bolder and braver. They were so much more eloquent. They were so much more direct and accusatory by calling out who are the actors that are causing the harm. Whether it's in 1 year or 5 that pass after this amendment, that I go to be with my mother in a heaven I don't believe in, it will have mattered to be on the right side. As a child who needed these benefits, and I was a child when I became a mom, I was 16, of a baby who needed these benefits. The idea that it's that offensive to even talk about how we would allocate these resources is an anathema to the justice and the goodness we're working for. I wish I could have fit more instances of the word children in this amendment because words matter. And in recent weeks, we've heard children. For another group of folks, it's young people. Colorado children, our kiddos. They're not vermin, they're not children of the dark. They're our children. And if our children I started to say we're living in, but we're dying under conditions where the water treatment facilities have ground to a halt. If our children, the children who benefit from this bill and who are referenced in this amendment, if doctors were picking which of our children to carry under their arms out of a hospital, we would be up in arms as well. We should. And this amendment doesn't even call on us to do what we should do, which is act. This amendment reminds me of I'm just going to quote our colleague from earlier about this amendment. No, I'm not. In drafting this amendment, was very clear with the incredibly brilliant and kind and patient drafter that she did not need to worry about the super technicalities because it wouldn't pass, but they're very committed to their job and they have to write it as if it did pass, how would it work, and I really appreciate that, but I kept telling her, please, you don't have to worry about that. And I'm embarrassed to admit that while it was fully my expectation to be standing alone. Because standing alone in this body, to be clear, is not standing alone. The whole world. It's not a Palestinian cause who's fighting for Palestinian liberation. It's a special kind of erasure to act like amongst those supporting this bill wouldn't be the thousands of Jews who are shutting down consulates in Illinois and train stations in DC and taking over streets in Indonesia, and not so much Jews there, but and in Tel Aviv and marching. This amendment aligns when we're fighting for food security with the many young Israeli teenagers who have now been caged for refusing their military service. Arrested. I'm an abolitionist, I tend to say caged. Teenagers, still children themselves, who care about the food nutrition of their fellow Israelis as well, you can be both, but as well as Palestinians. Those children, 18 and 19-year-olds, would ask us to do what we could. And if all we can do, I care about the chair's admonition. It's hard to phrase the amendment without being, there's no decorum, there's nothing civil about genocide. How we spend and allocate and allow our resources to be allocated, I mean, it's cultural, it's also neurodivergent than not finishing a thought. But I'm embarrassed to admit, I keep going back and forth about if I want to quote what she said or not, but I'm embarrassed to admit that while I fully expected it to be 64-1, I guess I have to ask you to vote yes, but really what I want to ask is in a few years when there are no Palestinian children left, because that is what will happen if we keep turning a blind eye to the ethnic cleansing happening on our watch, that we'll say never again and we'll stand up for the next round.
The time for debate has expired. The question before us is the adoption of Amendment L12. The House will stand in a brief recess. The House will come back to order. Members, just a point of clarification here. The hour has expired, which means that debate on the bill is over. We must vote on the amendment, which we will do. The bill sponsor has raised a point of order, which I will now hear. Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I request a title ruling.
There has been a request for a title ruling. Will the bill sponsors please meet me over on the right side? The House will stand in a brief recess. The committee will come back to order. The chair rules that the amendment does not fit under the title. To the bill. The question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 23002. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill passes. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The committee will rise and report.